Hey Josh,
Hey Renee, how you doing? Happy Hanukkah.
happy Hanukkah to you.
Thank you.
Um, so we're done our class. I'm so sad.
I
Can't wait.
know.
I can't wait for the next one.
I'm excited too. Keep your eyes peeled. Coming in the winter.
Okay. To be announced.
Expect 8 full weeks of delving into the secrets of the divine science.
That's crazy. I
Gonna be
guess
good.
there's a lot to learn. So
A lot to learn.
yeah. Um, so I just wanted to like almost circle back to the beginning, the very first class, when I asked you, is it dangerous to learn Kabbalah?
Yes.
And in this last class, you actually referred to that like several times. You said, this is where it gets dangerous because you can just say, well, everything is God. And so like anything I do is part of, the infinite. So it doesn't matter, what I do, where I go, so I guess that's the dangerous part. And like I kept having this conflict in my brain. And I was like, I had to like shut it off and just be like, no, you follow Torah and that's it. Like, so,
Good, good. No, I agree. Rabbi Josh says correct. Good.
Yeah. Like I kept having to say, like, what's the point of having the Torah? Like I kept having this internal struggle of like,
Yeah.
He's right. Like, what's the point? But then don't get off don't get off the derech, right? Don't get off the path. Like just keep go, like just
Right.
You just have to, that's why it's dangerous, I guess, right? That's why they say it can be, because you start having this internal, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the pantheistic or panentheistic elements of Kabbalah do a lot to subvert or upend kind of some of the basic building blocks of Judaism. But saying that everything is something means that we're like kind of left adrift in the morass, right? Like if I'm inside of the ocean, you can be like, yeah, it's all water, right? And I'm like, great, water's great. So I'll start drinking it and I'll be fine. But the problem is you drink seawater, you get sick and you go mad. Right. So what we need to develop in the midst of things is a sense of discernment. Like, how do we actually navigate what it means to be inside of this? And let's even say that in some way or another, everything is good. Everything is like, ultimately there is no difference and it's all gravy, baby. But like,
Right.
but that's different than being able to say, then that's different than saying I have the enzymes in which I can metabolize the seawater. Right. That's different than saying I have the tools in which I'm able to process, right, and metabolize, right, what it is that I'm taking in.
Right.
So I think that's like a new way though of thinking about, maybe not such a new way. I think it's actually a pretty classic way of thinking about Torah. It's an Eitzah Tova, right? Eitzah Ye'utza. It's good advice, right? Torah is the manifestation as we have it of God's wisdom, right? Of God's insight and of what it means to live a life of goodness and justice and equity. And again, woe unto those who think that the Torah is just a bunch of stories, i.e., like that what you're missing is that the Torah is actually, in some way, right, our entry point into what it means to go beyond, like to touch something greater than ourselves, to be in contact with the divine. But we do that through becoming more like God, as we were saying, more like God in the sense of becoming better people, what it means to become kinder, more compassionate people, what it means to imitate, right, God's qualities. So it's not the case of like becoming, we don't say imitatio Dei, like imitation of God. We don't say that when it comes to like God's wrath, right? We don't say that when it comes to like God's judgmental side, right? Well, we do say that in terms of God's forgiving side. We do say that in terms of God's kind side. So I think it sees like, what does it mean to actually like embody or manifest the image of God? It's to actually like the truth of the fullness of God, which does tend towards love, which does tend towards kindness.
Right. But then you could go the other way and say, well, God can be judgmental. He can be wrathful. So I'm going to be like God in that way. And that's where it gets dangerous.
Right. So
So
here's
that's
where
why,
also, this is why it is dangerous, in the sense of like, if you just look at it as ideas, abstract ideas, and without context, then it does end up becoming, this is why I think from the outset I was trying to frame, like, there's a reason Kabbalah has been kept secret. Now, it's pretty common nowadays to like teach it publicly, in a post, let's say, Hasidism world or post Kabbalah center world or whatever.
okay.
But I think there's wisdom in us keeping it a more private or more closed affair, because it's like, right, it's like giving a physics 101 student the keys to the nuclear reactor. Like, they don't know how to deal with something of that great power. Now, that isn't to say that we shouldn't actually then like encourage ourselves, support ourselves, and empower ourselves in terms of what it means to walk a mystical or spiritual path. But I think it means what we owe Kabbalah a lot, in the sense that like you owe it to like, you're devoted to it, right? Like, I think it's like thing. It's like we have this notion in America and Canada of like, oh, if something's good, it means it's good for me. I get something out of it. Yeah. Right. But the truth is, what it means to have a relationship with something good, it means that you owe it something as much as it owes you something, if not more so. Right. Like a PhD in English, like, loves English literature, not because it makes them like 70 grand or whatever on like an adjunct professor Scott, if that's even good money, right? They don't love English literature for that reason. They love English literature because they are devoted to it, right? They're stewards of it in some way or another. So like al chaz kama v'kama for something that's like Torah, right? That Kabbalah is something that we owe our time to, we owe our respect to, we owe our attention to actually give it the time and space it needs. That might mean decades of our lives before we actually see ourselves as Kabbalists, right? Or like see ourselves as authentic Jewish mystics, whatever that means. It is a real path that you have to walk. And it's also a community that you work your way into, and a body of text that you develop not just mastery of, but like a relationship with.
I also think,
I want to respond to you on point though. So like, why not become like a representative or a manifestation of God's judgmental side? So inside the literature of Kabbalah, there's this idea of that the right incorporates the left.
Okay.
So chesed on the right side and gevura on the left side, that the correct kind of synthesis of the two is that actually the right side is the more dominant aspect. The right incorporates the left. It's not that the left incorporates the right. And that's a very interesting way of thinking about strength, right? Strength is on the left side, but it's actually encircled by and absorbed by love, right? By chesed. So we see that actually that while the gevura is necessary, it is necessary as a component or an element in what's going on, but it's not supposed to stand on its own ever. And that, to be fair, neither is the right. Everything is supposed to be in some kind of balance. That's why we have the amuda emtsa'i, where you have the middle, moderating, mediating pillar of harmony. But the harmony isn't 50-50. The harmony is actually one in which one side, in a sense, is a little bit more real than the other. So I think like, I think in some ways we were talking about, especially in this last class, like, what does it mean to actually bring it into our lives? What does it mean to actually start to think about what it means to manifest these ideas? And part of it, an essential aspect of it is, what does it mean to actually like get to know who I am and what I'm about? So it might be the case that like you look inside yourself and you're like, oh, I'm more like Isaac than I am like Abraham. I am more of like a gevura type person. I'm very discerning, right? I'm very like, I'm not like an extrovert, I'm more introverted, something like that, right? And that might be true, but it's not. I think what we're being taught is not just to let something completely dominate our lives. It's about finding balance in some way. But there's a way to also exhibit or manifest those traits in a way that leads back into the whole, not in a way that just like turns the volume up on what that intensity is. So like, you're not like, there's a reason why the sitra achra, the evil side, stems from gevura, right? Gevura without balance becomes wrath. It becomes vindictiveness or vengeance. And those are destructive, non-harmonious traits. And those are not seen as the ones that are ultimately integrated into the whole.
Interesting. There's actually, so I was learning about challah making, and they were actually like the spiritual meaning when you make challah, and why like you use like a cup of sugar. You always use like way more sugar in your challah than you use salt. And they were saying the salt is like the gevura, and the sugar is like the what you call it, the chesed, and the kindness. Because you really only need a little bit of the gevura to to work and to make the challah harmonious, right? You always need, I mean, if you don't put the salt in, the challah doesn't taste as good. You always need that little bit of like, gevura in there. So yeah, it makes sense to have like a harmonious, what's I'm looking for.
Yeah, and this goes all the way back to the rabbis, right? Like in the Talmud, this idea of like, without the Yetzer Hara, the world couldn't exist. You need the Yetzer Hara for reproduction, for a healthy ego image, right? You need the Yetzer Hara, but it needs to be harnessed, right? It needs to be sublimated.
Yeah. Okay, so we have some questions, and I hope that I'm not sure what's going to happen when I click off this.
I see a pom-pom.
You see a pom-pom? It's my daughter's, some kind of one of her little squishy toys. Okay, so the questioner says,
like it's from Fraggle Rock.
It does. Okay.
Yeah.
It says, also, our tikkun is a result of Gilul/reincarnation. But that's another can of worms. Do you want to touch on that a bit? Is that like,
it's true. Okay. All right. Yeah, we can hit the reincarnation aspect.
Yeah. And like, okay, let me just continue. Like, do we have our own unique mission, or is there always some element of fixing that we didn't completely rectify before in previous lives? So this is about, like, I guess, reincarnation.
Yeah, Gilgulim. All right. Well, you know what?
So
it's in there.
I don't know what that is. So that's Gilgulim is reincarnation?
Yeah, Gilgul is the technical term especially in Kabbalah for reincarnation is the term used in English, but a better term might be another term used in English literature is metempsychosis, but I'm not sure that's actually a more helpful term. Not psychosis, like going insane, like metempsychosis in the sense of like the psyche is returning in some way. Gilgul is the idea that you come back in some way, like after death. Not in the sense of tchias amesim, right, or the reincarnation of the dead, which happens at the end of history, but rather in the sense that there, in a sense, is a finite number of, not finite. Okay, there's souls keep on returning until they complete their mission. Right? Everyone has, as the questioner implied, what they need to do, and to leave work undone means that you need to come back and fix it in some way or another. And there are ideas like, you'll see in Qabbalah. I just want to say, like, again, like for everyone in terms of a lot of these ideas, your mileage may vary. Like I'll be honest, put my cards on the table. Like my relationship to Kabbalah is in a way an attempt to try to synthesize philosophy and mysticism. So for me, it's really it's about these ideas, and it's about a way of relating to it's about like using new language and new ways of thinking about like the relationship between God and the created world and but I do think, like, even though like these more, let's say, outre ideas about like more, let's say, magical aspects or more supernatural aspects, like one might not find them palatable or reasonable. Again, your mileage may vary. But I do think actually it is the case that in everything that we are engaging with, there's something meaningful to find in it, and there's something like it's trying to tell us something, it's trying to teach us something. So you might take it like literally, like what we're describing is the way in which a soul returns after an iteration of one, around the wheel, and then it goes again. And the word Gilgul, right, or Galgal means wheel, right? So it's a notion of a cycle of some kind, right? You're returning to the
I see. Okay.
Or you might see it in a more philosophical sense, the sense of like what it's trying to teach us about the way in which we are part of part of a stream, right? Part of some kind of network or a chain of lives in which we are inheriting as much as we're bequeathing, right? That we're part of something that we are given and then we give over when we leave. And there's, and there's something very compelling about the fact that like it is a way of justifying the world in a sense, right? Like, when we look at our lives in its particular, in this one lifespan, it's very hard to say like, oh, things turn out fair, right? Good people turn out all right and bad people are punished, right? We see a lot like seems perverse. So with Gilgulim, right, with reincarnations, cycling of souls, then you can see like in the longue durée, right, in the long view of things, the long arc of history bends towards justice, right? That it all, it will all eventually, justice is found, right? It's people who did bad in this. It's kind of like karma, right? People who did bad, then like in the next reincarnation, they'll be, they'll get theirs, right? They'll be in a lower. So this idea that like if you return, might return as a lower creature, right? If you actually need to do some work repairing the lower aspects of yourself. Or you might return as a higher creature, right? You may return as a tzaddik, you might return as like a person.
Right.
Or you might return as a fish. So, you really don't know. I mean, what's really cool though, in Kabbalah especially, is it doesn't have this very vitalistic relationship to the cosmos. Everything has a soul. And everything is participating in one big connected network. Like we are all connected to each other, and not just human beings, but there is like everything is enchanted. Like everything is ensouled. There's a soul in everything. So hurting seemingly inanimate matter, like rocks or whatever, like still is in some way part of this huge system. So there's 4 different kinds of being. There's inanimate, what's called domain, silent. Then there's vegetative matter, somer, animal matter, chai.
Yeah.
You will not silence me.
I don't know.
And then finally human beings who are called, medaber, who are called speaking creatures, right?
Okay.
You want to get that? Maybe it's
off. Sorry, it's not
That's
my head. I don't know what to do to turn this off.
Eliyahu.
Okay, cool. Sorry.
So there's 4 different types. There's 4 different kind of like wavelengths of what it means to be in like a creature, right? From the most basic and corporeal, basic and material, to the most spiritual and intellectual, right? Where human beings are defined by our faculty of speech, our ability to have consciousness and to represent and to articulate. Something, and then above human being is an angel, right? There's something very divine about being able to speak. No wonder again, Torah is language. Right? So there's an idea that that we have all these things inside of us. We have all these 4 elements inside of us. We have all these 4 different levels or wavelengths inside of us. And the question, in a sense, is, are we able to find a way to integrate all of those and to offer them, bring them back to their source again? That's the dynamic. And there's a beautiful image I saw actually learning in Sefer Charedim, which is like a popular Kabbalistic work about the mitzvos by Elazar Azikri, who is the writer of Yedid Nefesh in Kabbalah Shabbat.
Oh, okay.
And he writes, he has this beautiful image of what a mitzvah is. He says it's like actually offering a gift to the king. And you, but that the king part, that's obvious. Oh yeah, God's a king. Good, big innovation. But the beautiful, I think the really beautiful aspect of the idea is that like every mitzvah is a gift, right? When we do a mitzvah, we want to offer something. It's an aesthetics of Judaism, right? We actually want to offer something beautiful to God. So like think about the way you do a mitzvah, right? Whether it's like the Hiddur mitzvah, beautifying the aspects of the mitzvah, right? The big etrog or whatever. Or I would even say, like, think about the way you use your body, right? The way you bring your body in what it is to do, or the way you bring your consciousness into what it is to do a mitzvah. If you're just like kind of tossing it off, would you give a friend a gift you spent 3 seconds thinking about? No, that doesn't exhibit, it's a friendship, right? The relationship is proved by the time and the attention that you take. So if you take real time to think and really think about what it means to offer this person that you love something special, and then again, what it would be like to offer God something dear.
That's very nice. Okay. I think I'd like to learn a little bit more about reincarnation, but another time.
I mean, there's a lot to be said about it. I mean, I'll say that. So there's an idea that individual souls return, right? That is the notion of the Gogul, but there's also an idea actually that the entire universe is doing its own rebooting start, that we're actually in the middle of one of the cycles, and each of the cycles is associated with one of the lower sefirot. So right now we're in the sefira associated with Gvura, which is why there's so many mitzvahs telling us not to do things. But what's the Torah of Chesed going to look like? That is a radical idea that was not followed up on in the history of Kabbalah. That's from Tamura. Yeah, so like you can look at it in terms of the individual soul is rebooted, right? Comes back and does their next cycle, or even that the whole world, in a sense, the whole universe, the whole cosmos itself actually has to be like laundered and go through a whole nother cycle. But but again, like all of these cycles hopefully take us closer and closer to the source, right? We're like working something out.
Right.
It's like for all of our computer nerds, it's like running a Mathematica program, and it's supposed to take like 14 hours. And it keeps on working itself. We're working out a problem, right? We're trying to work it out. We're trying to solve the world.
And it keeps cycling and cycling, yeah.
By the way, this is and that is the original Kabbalistic idea of what Tikkun Olam is, right? That Tikkun Olam didn't mean it didn't mean social justice in its Kabbalistic sense, but it does, I think, have an aspect of justice to it. But it meant doing what we can to actually repair creation at its metaphysical level. I do think it has political implications. I don't think it's totally detached, but it originally had to do with what do we do to do the pitch in to do the work we need to do to bring healing and repair to a fundamentally broken world.
Right. Okay.
And I think that's the dialectic we were saying before. Actually, sorry, the last thing I just want to throw in. You're saying if everything's God, what's the point? Well, I mean, yes, on one hand, we have this pantheistic idea in Kabbalah that everything is in some way imbued with divinity. Everything comes from God, sure. But on the other hand, we also have this very basic idea, especially from Lurianic Kabbalah on, that but also the world's also fundamentally broken. So there's something very interesting and something super compelling about which I find in the whatever's in between those two ideas, which is why I find actually Kabbalah also it's an immensely compelling system. It is, I think, holding two truths that are true but contradictory at the same time. Everything is awesome, right? In the words of the Lego Rabbi.
Yeah.
And also everything sucks, right? And it's true. They are both true. And how can you reconcile these two ideas?
I guess that's what makes it so interesting.
That's the thing. It's a really
talking about it.
Robust system about thinking about life. It really is.
Okay, next question. Let's go to the next question. Okay.
It's just good because we're Jews. It's good because it's really good. It's really compelling stuff.
Okay, so this questioner is asking, can you speak more?
Always.
Illuminate us, smiley face, to the holy sparks that were mentioned in the text. I read about these before in the Tashli prayer for one. Are these some kind of spiritual particles that are embedded in physical things, kind of like photons of spiritual light? Are there more holy sparks present in certain things like kosher versus non-kosher? Well, do you want to do the other? There's sort of several parts to this question.
Yeah, I mean, some of these are some of these are whole classes, and they will be we will go deeper into them when we do the next volume.
Yeah. Class. So
I'll give Roche Tavos about it.
No. Certain geographical places on earth, like Eretz Israel and Jerusalem, and even people, Kohanim, Levi'im versus Israeli, how do you say that? Yisraelim?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And are there holy sparks scattered all over the earth and universe? So if I go camping in Killarney Provincial Park, for example, and I dive in there and learn Torah and eat kosher marshmallows at the campfire, am I extracting the holy sparks that are embedded in the Canadian field up there?
Listen, I'm not going to be one to ever tell someone not to go camping and eat kosher marshmallows. That sounds like the ideal life. So that sounds great.
Yeah.
But is that metaphysically true? I don't know.
Yeah, that's what he's asking.
Okay, so I mean, this is where, in a sense, where the rubber hits the road. on one hand, I think we have, like, in a sense, like the difference between, let's call it mysticism and magic, right? And I'm going to say, when I say magic, what I mean is the ways in which I think the particular stands on its own. So magic would be, some people are more special than others, right? They're the magical people. Some places are more special than others. It's the magical land. Some, what was the other? Some things are more special than
Something,
others. Right?
yeah, like food or
Kosher
whatever, like
versus
kosher.
Um, the mystical aspect would be the one in which it's more like, well, everything, right? Everything is God. So the notion of like these distinctions end up kind of dissolving. So I think we do run into trouble when we say that geography, like that space and time matter vis-a-vis God. So to say that like some places or some objects are more divine than others leads us in some, let's say, troubling theological directions. That having been said,
But wait, can't you say that a certain time is more holy? Like Shabbat, right? We make the time holy.
oof, Magoo.
So
Good point. Very good point. Okay, so I think here again, here is where like living inside of space and time and living outside of, or what, not, you know, not living, but whatever, being outside of space and time. Maybe not even being. Who knows? Outside of space and time, inside of space and time. You know, literally incommensurable perspectives. Look, there's no way to think outside of space and time. This is what Immanuel Kant
right,
calls the categories of perception, right? Like space and time are fundamental to the ways in which we think about, you know, everything. Not just think about, like
yeah,
have a concept at all. You know, and
yes,
like this is what I was getting at in the second class, which is why it was a real brain breaker, was that like what it means to actually think about God is to unthink, because our thinking is fundamentally grounded in categories of space and time. So you can't think of something that's not in space and time. It's impossible. Hence, brain breaking.
yeah,
Soul shattering.
yes.
So, what I wanted to respond to this brilliant question, really like robust question, is I'm going to start just by giving a quick overview of what the notion of the Nitzosos HaKodesh are, the holy sparks, and then I will bring in the question of how do we relate to them. So I'll use the main Lurianic idea, which again, we will go way more into depth when we do the second volume of this class. Essentially, God needed to create buffers so that God's energy, God's essence, could be infused into the world. Because if there were no buffers, then it would just be God and everything would be, right? Everything would be God.
Right, right,
So for there to be a world in which there are like differences, discrete objects, space and time, there needed to be these buffers. We call these buffers klipot, right? We call them shells. They're like anti-God matter to contain God. Okay. However, the light that was being contained was still too strong. There wasn't the balance that we were talking about before between light and dark, between outward and inward, right? The container wasn't strong enough. So the container shattered. And what trickled down into existence were two things: remnants of the light and remnants of the shells. Okay, so we have this anti-God matter that's tangled up, right, in kind of a quantum way, with the God particles, right, the Godtons. Now, the problem, though, again, is we can't think of that spatially or geographically, right? It's into existence, not into like a place, but it's into existence. The metaphor for that is that it's in a place, right? But it's fundamental to just existence itself. So the task for the human being, right, for the Jew, is to relate to the universe in such a way in which we are delving into its depth, to relocate, right, the sparks of holiness that have filtered in, and to restore them to their source and reconstitute the fullness of the divine, right? And that is what Mashiach looks like, is when we bring all the sparks back, and God, in a sense, is God is kivyachol, right, restored to God's fullness. So that's how the Lurianic Kabbalists think about what it means to do a mitzvah. When you do a mitzvah, that's what you're doing, right? You are delving into what you're taking up, and you are bringing those sparks back into the universe, into the divine. But then the question is, great, so then why is it distributed equally? Like, why not for everybody? Why not for everything? Again, why the Torah, right? Why yes, why no? And here's where we hit a problem, because I think what we can take from this is not that, in a sense, God is distributed spatially, because that's actually idolatry, but rather to say that from a bottom-up perspective, what we're able to relate to, or what we have in us to accomplish, is configured particularly. I'll use a different example. Rabbi Nachman went to Uman, right, a city in Ukraine, I want to say, to
Yes. Yeah.
see, I'm not sad of space and time. Went to Uman, a city in Ukraine, specifically because, and this is why he has to be buried there, because it's in the deepest gulas, it's in the deepest exile, and it was where specifically there were many Jews who were slaughtered during the Khmelnytsky massacres in the late 1600s, and many people who had been turned to heresy during the heresies of Shabtai Tzvi and of Yaakov Frank. Okay, so his task was to go and to redeem the souls who had actually sunk into those depths. Now, again, the question is, why do you have to go there, right? Souls are, again, not located spiritually either. I think it's because the story around them was located in that space, right? Their narrative, right, of these souls who had been either unjustly slaughtered or who had fallen into heresy, whom he had to go redeem. The way to access them was by getting back in touch with their story, right? Getting back in touch with their life narrative. So we went there to kind of like tune in, right? To like tune in his perception, because while the souls maybe aren't trapped spatially, we are. Could Rabbi Nachman have abstracted so much to like still get at those souls without in some way using the world to help him? And the answer was no. We use our bodies, we use our clothes, we use our physical objects, we use our mitzvah materials, whatever it is, we use them to help us tune in. That's why Torah gives us what we need to help us tune into the right wavelength, tune into the right station, right, with our souls. We are in bodies. We are in space and time. And thus, we need space and time to help us tune in. We need spaces, places, and things to help us do that. So back to the question too, are some people or some places, da-da-da-da-da. I don't think so ultimately. And I think you can't say that without saying that in some ways, like, you are reducing God to some kind of particular, which I do think is like, that's the danger of it. But the question though, if you flip the question and say, is there something special about these things in the way in which they help us tune in? Then I would say yes.
Okay. That makes sense.
Just put a button on it. Please go camping. Please go make your kosher marshmallows. That sounds great.
All right, next question. Can you please define or explain Shekhinah? We've noticed that you use the term Shekhinah in various ways. For example, in this class, you connected was it Shekhinah or Shekinah? Shekhinah, right? Shekhinah to selfhood. But in other classes, you have referenced how we invite. Okay, I'll start again.
No, connected Shekhinah to whom? To what?
In this class, you connected Shekhinah to selfhood.
Oh, selfhood. Okay.
Yeah, but in other classes, you referenced how we invite Shekhinah in on Shabbat. How are these ideas or definitions connected?
Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome to Qabbalah, which is a treasure trove of associative thinking. So I'm not making these. These are there. So the notion of Shekhinah as associated with ani, right, the word for ego or I, is all over Kabbalah and Hasidut. So there's the notion of like Shekhinah as the individuated self of God. And then in that way, the paradigm for our own sense of self, not just paradigm, but like in a way, like our own self is an iteration then of Shekhinah, is in there, right? It is in there. It is structurally isomorphic. It maps, our self in a sense maps onto God's self. But
Okay.
the Sefirot, these dynamics are never just one thing or another. Again, they're not contained, they're not controlled by space and time. They are all of these different things, but like different levels, different aspects, different wavelengths, right? They are simultaneously manifesting in all these different ways. The question again is like, how are you tuning in to perceive it? So Shekhinah is the last sphera, but also in a way stands on her own as the partner of the other 9 Sefirot, especially the partner of the lower 6 Sefirot associated with Tiferet. Shekhinah is contrasted with the more transcendent aspect of God associated with Tiferet and above. Shekhinah is the immanent aspect of God, the aspect of God that is accessible in some way, the one that we are able to connect with, and not just connect with, but even identify with, right? Again, the self connection. Shekhinah is most commonly associated with the divine feminine, but not the only aspect of God that is associated with feminine. The left side of the Sefirot are associated with the feminine. Bina is seen as the upper mother, and Shekhinah is seen as the lower mother. There's a lot to be said. I mean, Shekhinah is probably the most kind of worked out or the most discussed because, again, immanent, accessible, the side of God that we not just deal with, but we identify with as such. When we think about the ways in which we are playing some role in the cosmic drama, we are identifying with Shekhinah, and then Shekhinah in her sacred choreography in the heavenly, right, in the heavenly drama. And in that way, also, what's worth noting is that Shekhinah is also associated with, or also has the kinui, the cognomen, the nickname that sounds too paltry. Or another way of referring to Shekhinah is Knesset Israel, is the congregation of Israel. So there's also a notion of Israel as a whole is associated with Shekhinah as well. Again, not associated with, not identified with. Those two are very different. We are, like the notion of Israel, the notion of the Jewish people is also a reiteration of Shekhinah, right? The individual self, the general population of Israel, the general like individuated self of, all right, kind of going all the way up.
Okay. That was all the questions.
Okay, great. We're done. Figured it out. All the mysteries of the universe solved. Well, I think maybe that was a great question to end on, and all the questions have been great. Not just great, but getting better and better as the class goes on, which shows that you can tell learning is better when the questions are better. Right? Yeah. Learning is happening when the questions are better. The point of learning isn't answers. The point of learning is better questions. And I'm really impressed with the ways in which you have, as a you have let this be a productive challenge in terms of what it means to expand ourselves and to admit new ideas, new concepts, new ways of thinking, instead of, which I think is a real risk in teaching Kabbalah, especially, let's say, in a more introductory capacity, is the way in which it just conforms, I think, to like what we expect of it, or our ideas of what mysticism is, or spirituality is, or has to be. I think what's amazing about Torah, in a sense, is that, you know, and I'll end on this thought. I mean, what's amazing about Torah is everything, but one of the things that I find really inspiring and what really beautiful teachings in Kabbalah and Hasidut is the notion that Torah is atidi. Torah is eternal. That doesn't mean that Torah is beyond time, that it is the same and before time, but rather that Torah is always true, because in each and every time, a different aspect of it is able to come out and teach us something. Because only in the time that we have was that aspect able then to be presented, was able to be accessed. Torah is eternal because it keeps on being true. It's a dynamic kind of truth and a dynamic kind of eternality. And I think that is really true when we think about, again, Torah in the larger sense, not just this one book, not just the one text, but Torah as this spanning eternal dialogue between us and God in terms of trying to figure out what the wisdom is that God wants us to know, what the life is that God wants us to lead, and what it is that we need to do. The key is to realize that it is truly, as we call it in Judaism, an avodah. It is not just worship, which is what avodah tends to mean, but it's work. It's not work in the sense that it's tiring, although it will be, but it's work in the sense that it demands effort, it demands attention, but it's also something in which we're able to contribute and create and produce something of real worth and contribute towards this larger project of what it means to, God willing, bring healing to the universe.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much. It was a great class.
Thank you all for the great class.
We'll have a little bit of a break to let everything soak in, and then we'll be ready for your next.
A little bit of a Kabbalah break, but keep your eyes peeled for a little getting back to basics. We're going to do some rabbinics learning. If you want to learn, that's the thing. If you want to learn how to learn Talmud, that's I think one of the things hopefully also come through is that Kabbalah is not something detached from normative Judaism. It is the most intense version of normative Judaism. So to really get what's going on in the Zohar, in Chassidus or whatever, you can go right back to the original sources, Tanakh, Talmud, Midrash, Halacha, and see the ways in which implanted in them is a seed of the mystical. But you got to know, in a sense, what it means to go back to the basics, so you can see that it was already there to begin with.
Okay, so we'll keep everybody updated on what's up, and thank you so much.
It was really, honestly, it was my schus. It was really my merit. It was my privilege to be on this journey with you all. Shkoyach.
Thank you.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.